On January 28, 2025, President Donald Trump's Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, put forward a plan to introduce universal tariffs on U.S. imports, starting at 2.5% and then increasing monthly by the same rate, with the possibility of reaching as high as 20%. The intention behind this incremental approach is to allow businesses and foreign governments sufficient time to adapt and work out favorable trade agreements. Yet President Trump has indicated a desire for heftier duties, announcing a forthcoming move to levy tariffs on imported computer chips, semiconductors, and pharmaceuticals. He has criticized existing subsidies as problematic and believes higher tariffs would reduce imports while stimulating domestic manufacturing. These rates are projected to surpass the initial 2.5%. From his inauguration on January 20, 2025, President Trump rapidly put in place a variety of tariffs affecting several of America's main trading partners, notably Canada, Mexico, and China. These measures align with his administration's broader objectives, such as addressing illegal immigration, combating drug smuggling, and recalibrating trade imbalances. However, thus far, the Trump administration has focused these new duties largely on allied nations. On his first day in office, President Trump declared a 25% tariff on all products entering from Canada and Mexico, defending this step as essential in fighting unlawful immigration and curbing the flow of drugs, notably fentanyl, into the United States. The tariffs are slated to take effect on February 1, 2025. Canada has vehemently opposed the move, with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau warning that it would harm both Canada's economy and U.S. businesses and consumers. He underscored the importance of preserving a healthy economic alliance between the two countries and hinted at possible retaliatory actions if necessary. Canada's response extends beyond merely implementing counter-tariffs. It is reaching out to a network of international partners, including the European Union, Denmark, Mexico, and others, to build a collaborative front. Canadian Foreign Minister Melanie Joly has mentioned plans to consult with counterparts in allied nations such as Britain, Mexico, and multiple EU member states, aiming to craft a unified strategy to manage the looming threat of U.S. tariffs. She highlighted the need for practical solutions and noted that conversations regarding potential retaliatory steps are already underway in Europe. Chrystia Freeland, formerly Canada's finance minister and a top contender to follow Prime Minister Trudeau, has suggested hosting a global summit. This meeting would involve leaders from Mexico, Denmark, Panama, and the EU, designed to coordinate a shared reply to the U.S. administration's talk of tariffs and their accompanying sovereignty claims. Meanwhile, Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum also spoke out against the tariffs, contending that they would not effectively solve immigration challenges or drug trafficking issues. She called for joint efforts between the U.S. and Mexico on these complicated matters, and cautioned that such tariffs risk damaging diplomatic relationships. Moving beyond North America, President Trump is additionally considering a 10% tariff on all imports originating in China. He argues that China's production and distribution of fentanyl, a potent synthetic opioid, worsens America's drug epidemic. This new tariff is also set to begin on February 1, 2025. Beijing has responded by underscoring the mutual benefits of U.S.-China economic relations and expressing a willingness to engage in productive talks to resolve trade conflicts. An extension of President Trump's trade approach involves warning the European Union that unless it ramps up purchases of U.S. oil and gas, it too could face tariffs. He asserts that the EU should reduce its trade deficit with the United States by significantly raising energy imports, or risk having tariffs placed on European goods. President Trump's firm position goes beyond tariff policies. He has revived an interest in acquiring Greenland and has declined to eliminate military action as a potential means to secure it. Denmark, in turn, has taken steps to reinforce its sovereignty over the territory, while also strengthening ties with European allies. Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen has been conferring with other European heads of state to build a united front against U.S. pressure. Emphasizing that Europeans must act in concert, she held discussions with German Chancellor Olaf Scholz and French President Emmanuel Macron about deepening European cooperation and security. Chancellor Scholz reiterated that territorial boundaries should not be altered by force, implicitly criticizing the U.S. stance on Greenland. Denmark has allotted approximately $2.1 billion to strengthen its Arctic defense capabilities. This budget will fund the development of 3 additional Arctic naval vessels, the procurement of surveillance drones, and improvements in satellite monitoring, actions intended to uphold security in Greenland and assert Denmark's commitment to the territory. Denmark is likewise reaching out to other European nations in the hope of securing collective support to maintain its hold over Greenland. Prime Minister Frederiksen is in dialogue with key European leaders in anticipation of an upcoming security summit in Brussels, where discussions may include deploying European forces to Greenland, though Denmark has yet to formally request such action. In line with this, Denmark has moved forward with further military spending to enhance its Greenland defenses, a region becoming ever more strategically relevant as climate change makes more resources and shipping routes accessible. Greenland's Prime Minister Mut Ba Egede has reaffirmed that while his government is open to closer ties with the United States, Greenlanders do not aspire to U.S. citizenship. He emphasized the island's pursuit of autonomy and independence, affirming that it belongs to its own people. At the same time, the European Union, a significant trading partner for the United States, is grappling with heightened tensions in its energy sector. Ukraine has shut down the transit of Russian energy, Qatar has suspended gas exports to Europe, and Iran has halted supplies under dubious technical pretenses. Such developments have intensified the EU's existing energy challenges. Additional U.S. sanctions on Russian oil and gas have further pushed global energy prices upward, deepening the woes of European nations struggling with soaring gas costs, public dissatisfaction with EU leadership, and persistent inflation. To compound these difficulties, President Trump has declared intentions to impose still more tariffs on European goods, escalating the already tense situation with the EU and posing a serious threat to long-term economic stability in Europe. As a counterweight, the EU is moving to shield itself from potential fallout by reinforcing its own trade relationships beyond the United States. This includes speeding up existing plans to diversify trade ties worldwide, exemplified most notably by its newly signed free trade agreement with Mexico, a neighbor of the United States. This arrangement not only reinforces the EU's foothold in North America, but also illustrates its capacity to form important alliances beyond U.S. influence. Furthermore, the EU has secured a noteworthy free trade agreement with nations in South America, underscoring its aim to expand its global trade network in anticipation of potential tariffs from President Trump. By taking these steps, the EU seeks to protect itself from possible economic pressure exerted by the United States, while asserting its position as a key figure in international trade. These alliances go beyond mere economic advantages. They serve as geopolitical indications of the EU's resolve to address and counter challenges that could arise under a second Trump administration. In the following discussion, we look at how the EU might retaliate and how such measures could shape the relationship between the European Union and the United States. The European Union and Mexico have reached a modernized trade agreement that substantially advances their economic ties. Completed on January 17, 2025, this update aims to lower each side's reliance on the United States, especially in light of prospective tariff increases under President Donald Trump. Central to the new accord is the elimination of steep import duties on a variety of EU goods sent to Mexico, including items like cheese, poultry, pork, pasta, apples, jams, chocolate, and wine, a move likely to give EU agricultural exports a considerable boost. It also promises EU businesses greater access to Mexican government procurement, investment opportunities, and service industries such as finance and telecommunications, ensuring they receive similar privileges to those Mexico grants its other favored trading partners, including the US and South Korea. The deal includes binding pledges covering labor rights and environmental protections, reflecting both parties' dedication to sustainable development, and it enhances the availability of vital raw materials so that industries can secure the resources they need. This refreshed agreement updates the 2000 EU-Mexico Global Agreement, mirroring present-day economic realities and aiming to deepen their strategic alliance. Both EU and Mexican legislators must now approve it, and the ratification process is likely to undergo careful scrutiny from numerous groups, including European farmers worried about facing additional competition. At the same time, the European Union and the Mercosur bloc, Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, and Uruguay, have concluded an expansive trade accord after 25 years of negotiations. This arrangement seeks to create one of the globe's largest free trade zones, embracing over 700 million individuals and nearly a quarter of the planet's GDP. It intends to end tariffs on more than 90% of the products exchanged between the EU and Mercosur, possibly saving EU exporters around 4 billion euros each year. It also opens up Mercosur's markets to vital European industries such as automobiles and chemicals, while allowing South American producers of beef and poultry improved, though quota limited, access to EU consumers. Both sides vow to respect the Paris Climate Accord and undertake measures to curb deforestation by 2030, backed by systems that can address potential breaches. Despite the possible economic upsides, the deal has encountered resistance within the EU, notably from agricultural and environmental advocates, concerned that more imports from South America might harm European farmers and undermine ecological standards. French President Emmanuel Macron has been particularly vocal, insisting on reinforced protections and clearer commitments to sustainability. To be activated, every one of the EU's 27 member states and the European Parliament must ratify this pact, a requirement that could pose significant hurdles in nations with sizable farming sectors and potentially delay implementation for years. Right after World War II, the United States took a leading role in helping Europe rebuild, establishing the initial foundation for a partnership with what would later become the European Union. The 1948 Marshall Plan was crucial in reviving war-ravaged economies, aiming to foster stable conditions that would encourage regional cooperation. The U.S. also backed the formation of the European Coal and Steel Community in 1951, viewing it as a safeguard against future hostilities between France and Germany by uniting core industries. In 1954, the EU's forerunner set up a delegation in Washington, D.C., to manage the growing commercial ties, and this relationship deepened with the creation of the United States mission to the European communities in Brussels in 1961, signifying a joint aspiration to develop stronger political and economic collaboration. Soon after the war, the United States also emerged as a global power actively shaping the New World Order, taking concrete steps to restrain Soviet expansion and champion democratic principles. In 1947, President Harry S. Truman proclaimed the Truman Doctrine, signaling a shift in U.S. foreign policy by pledging aid to free peoples under threat from armed minorities or outside interference, with a particular focus on halting the spread of communism. 2 years later, the U.S. led efforts to establish the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, creating a mutual defense arrangement with Canada and a number of Western European states. Besides offering financial resources, the U.S. stationed troops in Europe and appointed General Dwight D. Eisenhower as NATO's first Supreme Commander. Meanwhile, the Marshall Plan of 1948 complemented this defense strategy by supplying extensive aid to rebuild Europe's economies, helping to secure an environment where democratic systems could take hold and further discouraging communism. Between 1950 and 1953, the Korean War strengthened military collaboration within NATO, motivated by the perceived danger of communist encroachment. Consequently, NATO formed the Supreme Headquarters Allied Powers Europe in 1951, again placing Eisenhower in a key leadership position and transforming the alliance from a primarily political agreement into a comprehensive military arrangement. Still, the Suez Crisis of 1956 revealed tensions within the alliance when Egypt seized control of the Suez Canal, prompting Britain, France, and Israel to intervene militarily in an effort to reclaim it. President Eisenhower opposed their move, apprehensive that it would destabilize the area and possibly align Arab nations more closely with the Soviet Union. Consequently, the United States exerted diplomatic and economic pressure on its European allies to step back, underscoring points of divergence and hinting at the prospect of a more autonomous European foreign policy approach. The Berlin Crisis of 1961 marked a decisive episode in the Cold War that deeply affected relations between the evolving European community and the United States. It began in June 1961 when Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev met with President John F. Kennedy and called for the withdrawal of Allied forces from West Berlin, threatening a separate peace treaty with East Germany that would effectively undermine the existing four-power agreements, guaranteeing American, British, and French access rights to West Berlin. In response, the United States reaffirmed its backing of West Berlin, with President Kennedy seeking authorization to enlarge the Army's strength and directing an increase in draft quotas, signaling firm resistance to Soviet pressure. Throughout this standoff, the value of NATO as a unifying force became clearer, as its principle of collective defense gave Western powers a coordinated framework for military and diplomatic measures against Soviet moves. During the crisis, the United States also maintained its support for Europe's integration, regarding a cohesive and economically vital Europe as a critical barrier to communist expansion. This was evident in American endorsement of initiatives like the European Economic Community, which promoted closer economic and political ties among Western European states. When it came to the Vietnam War, stretching from 1955 to 1975, disagreements emerged between Washington and its European partners. As the United States escalated its military engagement in Southeast Asia, a number of European governments hesitated to offer significant backing. France was notably opposed to the American intervention, driven by its own historical legacy in Indochina and a deliberate choice to distance itself from U.S. foreign policy choices. Meanwhile, the United Kingdom and West Germany showed some level of public support, but refrained from sending combat forces, revealing a diverse spectrum of European reactions. Economic frictions also surfaced during this era, particularly in regard to monetary issues. The collapse of the Bretton Woods system in the early 1970s created considerable swings in currency exchange rates, undermining European economies. In an effort to rely less on the US dollar and foster monetary stability, European leaders introduced the European Monetary System, EMS, in March 1979, under the stewardship of Roy Jenkins, then president of the European Commission. The EMS was intended to bring European Economic Community member states closer together on monetary policy by fixing exchange rate margins among their currencies, using the European Currency Unit, ECU, as a reference, and mandating intervention if exchange rates strayed beyond agreed-upon thresholds. This system aimed to consolidate Europe's economic integration and protect member states from the uncertainties of global currency markets. During the Reagan administration, Europe and the United States generally shared an emphasis on economic liberalization and free market principles, aligning with the European objective of creating a unified market under the Single European Act of 1986. Still, trade arguments occasionally erupted, particularly over agricultural subsidies tied to the Common Agricultural Policy. After the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, a major reorientation took place in global affairs, prompting the European Union and the United States to reshape their partnership with an eye toward economic collaboration and peacekeeping. This transformation was cemented by agreements that widened the purview of cooperation across the Atlantic. The Transatlantic Declaration of November 1990 put in place a more formal structure for political dialogue, highlighting shared commitments to democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. Later, in December 1995, the new transatlantic agenda went further by articulating 4 overarching aims: supporting peace, stability, democracy, and development worldwide, jointly tackling global challenges such as environmental problems and terrorism, advancing world trade and deepening economic ties, and strengthening cross-Atlantic engagement in education and culture. This framework moved beyond mere consultation, laying the groundwork for concerted efforts and unified actions between the EU and the United States. Against this historical backdrop, the growing trade friction triggered by U.S. tariffs on multiple trading partners, including the European Union, Canada, Mexico, and China, threatens broad ramifications. A collective and well-coordinated countermeasure could weigh heavily on the U.S. economy, given its substantial reliance on a steady inflow of imports. If these nations imposed retaliatory duties or barriers, it would likely disrupt U.S. markets, exacerbate inflation, and place extra financial strain on American consumers. By focusing on major industries such as technology, automobiles, pharmaceuticals, and agriculture, a combined response could lead to more expensive production inputs, diminished competitiveness of U.S. firms, and elevated consumer prices, all under conditions of rising inflation. China, Canada, and the EU, which serve as key trading partners to the United States, possess notable influence thanks to their aggregate economic power and their capacity to redirect trade to alternative markets. For its part, the EU might see this challenge as a reason to boost diversification and expand its strategic self-reliance, easing its dependence on American imports, technology, and defense. Canada and Mexico, both integral components of North American supply chains, could equally leverage their positions to negotiate more balanced trade conditions. Meanwhile, China, as a major force in global exports, could deepen ties with other regions through initiatives like the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, thereby diminishing U.S. influence. Over time, a cooperative response by nations disadvantaged by U.S. tariffs would not only deal a blow to the American economy, but could also cause a reconfiguration of the international economic landscape. If the U.S. opts to continue on a protectionist track, it risks isolating itself while paradoxically promoting greater cohesion among its trading partners. The knock-on effects might include a waning share for the U.S. in global markets, a fragmented system of international trade, and increasing difficulties in preserving economic stability within the United States. That concludes this video. We sincerely value your taking the time to join us. If you found our material helpful or inspiring, please consider offering your support by giving it a like and subscribing so you can stay part of our community. Your involvement means a great deal to us.